If networking feels icky to you, it could be that you are not creating meaningful strategic partnerships. And that is our topic today. Danielle, I know you're someone who creates meaningful strategic partnerships. Why do you think people should listen to this episode?
Well, I think that we are constantly in the world out there talking to other people, and we can make it more meaningful rather than just trying to find a way of how can you help me? Why don't we have a meaningful relationship, and then the things that come out of that are amazing. Not just going in with what can you do for me and how can I help you, making it transactional.
I like that. So our guest today is Madeline Reeves, CEO of Fearless Foundry, and also a podcast host. And we're talking about this topic. I heard that you have maybe a question, but maybe a little bit of a challenge for listeners going into this listening.
Yeah, I think listen to this episode and think of someone maybe that you've fallen out of touch with that was a meaningful connection for you, because it still is. A lot of times we think that if I haven't reached out to that person in a while, I can't do it anymore. And it's never too late. It's never too early either. But I think just reaching out to people and saying, hey, I was thinking about you. And maybe saying, hey, I just listened to this episode of The Opposite of Small Talk, my favorite podcast. And they were talking about building meaningful relationships. And I thought of you. So we're giving you an in to easily reach out to that person who has been on your mind and maybe you have not felt in a position to reach out to them.
I love that. And someone popped into my head as you were saying that. So I am going to text them right now. Enjoy our conversation with Madeline.
Madeline, welcome to The Opposite of Small Talk. We are so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
It has been a while in the making. We met, I think it was almost 2 years ago now, where we actually met in person. And through our friend Thanmeet Sethi, who was one of our favorite guests here. And so it is just how the world continues to connect us to good people is my favorite thing. So I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And I love the opportunities we've had the last couple of years to savor those in-person moments. So it was really lovely. You're one of my few connections that I actually met in person first. And then now I'm doing something virtual with, which I feel like is the opposite of the way things have been a lot over the last couple of years.
Yes, it is so nice to have that in-person connection first. Just because I feel like I know you a little bit better. But we're going to start. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've come to do the work that you do.
Okay. Yeah, I am a creative by heart and by trade. So my background, I grew up in a very creative community. My mom is an artist, and I grew up around the arts community as a kid. And growing up, my big rebellion was I thought I was going to be a scientist, which is kind of like the opposite, I feel like, of everybody's rebellion. But my mom, being an artist, really wanted me to go to art school, and I was like, no, I'm going to become a doctor. Which is I swear, the opposite of everybody's story. So I went to school at University of Washington. I was studying to become a pediatric oncologist, and I had a big life shift during my college years. I had a kid my junior year in college, and it really set me on a different trajectory. The next 10 years of my life were really defined by providing for that kiddo, and so I started a career a little bit just by chance. And I think it's one of those things where life is never linear. But I ran into a former teacher of mine who had said, I think you should get a job in tech. There's a lot of people hiring in tech. And so I worked for over a decade in the tech industry as a very corporate girly, worked for companies from Fortune 500s all the way to startups. And I did a lot of work in kind of international business development. And then I just got to this point where it wasn't working for me anymore for a lot of different reasons. I had my second kid. I was really sick of being the youngest and only woman in most of the rooms that I was entering into, and just kind of feeling that gentle thud of my head against an invisible ceiling where, it was oh, we couldn't possibly pay you more. We couldn't possibly give you equity. And so I started to kind of assess what was the work that I really wanted to be doing. And I felt really called to work with founders. I felt really called to work with people who were starting businesses and companies. And I had started to get these little inklings here and there because friends were asking me about, like, oh yeah, I'm starting a business. Could you help me with my website, or could you help me with my brand? And so I started doing projects on the side, and over the course of 2 years, that turned into my full-time gig. And then very quickly that turned into leading a team. And so my work these days kind of falls into a couple different buckets. One is I, lead my company, which is called Fearless Foundry, and we're a creative consultancy that does marketing and brand work. And then I also am kind of a serial entrepreneur of sorts. So I've started a couple companies. I'm co-founding a new company. And then also I do a lot of strategy work with organizations that are trying to figure out how to scale. And sometimes that looks like coaching leaders of teams, and sometimes that looks like coaching founders. So I always kind of feel like I have my hands in lots of different things, but at its core, my work is really about bringing more equity into the world and seeing entrepreneurship and building companies as a way for folks who wouldn't have otherwise had a seat at the table to create that opportunity for themselves and for the people they care about.
I just want to go back to, I love that your rebellion was, I'm going to be a doctor. I feel like that just shows you, like, it doesn't matter what house you grow up in, like, you want to do the opposite, right?
Pretty much. And again, like, I was a dancer. I thought I was going to go to school for fashion design, but there's definitely that moment where you're like, I can't follow the path of my parents, And so, yeah, I went in a different direction. And then even when I went into tech, I was the black sheep of my family for a long time because I come from 3 generations of entrepreneurs. So me having like health insurance and a 401k like felt like very, very different than the way I was raised.
So tell us a little bit about the relationships that you build, because that also seems like that is the underlying part of what you do. And we want to talk about meaningful and strategic relationships, which sometimes can feel, I don't know, right? A relationship can feel icky when it has like a strategy behind it.
Yeah.
But tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's interesting because this was something I didn't realize that I was good at until I got to the point of starting my own company, which is kind of ironic given the fact that I worked in business development for such a long time. But I've always been a person who was taught to not be transactional in the ways that I relate to other people. And so, what I realized in hindsight when I left kind of my business development roles was like, oh, I was just really good at building genuine connections with people and caring about them and asking them about their lives and remembering those things and checking in on them and reaching out just to see how they were doing, not just to sell them something or to pitch them on something. And, what I noticed was that, those relationships that went with me from that first tech company I worked for went to the next tech company, went to the next company. And then ironically, it was actually somebody in my business development world, somebody who had been like a client or a managed account for over a decade, who was the first person who suggested that I should start my own business too. And so I look at my whole trajectory and I'm like, wow, if it wasn't for the relationships I had, particularly with really amazing women too, I had a lot of women leaders and entrepreneurs in my circle who were so encouraging of me. And, and then when you make that leap to starting your own thing, you really do have to rely on your network and on your relationships, because I was in that phase of entrepreneurship where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm selling. What do you think I should sell? What would you pay me to do? And what was really amazing about that opportunity is I had a lot of folks around me who, were willing to say like, I think you're really good at this, or like, yeah, I would buy that from you. And that led to kind of those first couple years in business. But even, I've been an entrepreneur now for 8 years, and I was thinking about this even this past year because I launched a new initiative as part of my company. We did a first of a kind event that was called Advisory Amplified. It was this crazy event we did over the last couple months where we took our company on tour along with a bunch of other companies, and it involved so many people, like probably easily 50 plus people were involved in some of the production process of it. And I had this moment, we were at our last stop in Boston after being on the road for 3 weeks, and I was like, oh my gosh, all I did was like reach out to people and say like, hey, would you want to be a part of this thing? And I was really overwhelmed by how many people said yes, and how many of those people had known me for 10, 12, 15 years. And, I asked one of my friends, I was like, why did you say yes to this? And I was like, you're just the kind of person who, shows up when they say they're going to show up. And I think so much of great relationships is about that, is about stepping up and being true to our word and being accountable and supportive of other people's work. And so I've now gotten far enough in my career that I have these moments there. I can see how those relationships have paid off in so many different ways. And again, it's a skill that I never set out to be great at, but it's played a huge and fundamental role in the growth of my career and the growth of my companies.
So I am thinking of Danielle because Danielle is also quite good at this. And I do think there is something to being the kind of person that shows up. And that is definitely her. Because that then inspires other people to do the same for you. I'm thinking about in my life, the other thing that you said that really resonated was this idea of being excited for other people. So I have other people in my life that I genuinely am excited to follow up and say, oh, well, what happened with this? Or when I think of a connection between two different people that would be really good, it's so energizing and exciting. So is that, I'm thinking that's what a meaningful strategic relationship is about.
Absolutely. And what I'll say there is the key word that you said is connection. And I think that the people who are best at this, identify themselves as connectors. I will say that to people oftentimes when I meet them. And I'll say, and what that means to me is if there's someone you're looking to know, if there's somebody that I have a relationship with, I would love to make an introduction. I also mention to people, it doesn't have to be right now. If there's a point downstream where you're just curious if I might have a relationship with somebody who you could benefit from, let me know. And I'm always, thoughtful about those things too, because I never want to, exploit any of the relationships I have. But I also think when you identify as a connector, people realize that you are in it for creating value for your network. You're not in it for just doing the transaction. And for me, I think it has a layer of humility of recognizing that it's not about me all the time. It's not about the work that I do. Yes, there's amazing things that my companies do. And if somebody was to come to me and it wasn't a fit for us, I would still make that introduction, right? Because I care. And I think that, that people who kind of take themselves a little too literal when it comes to networking, this is the thing that people get wrong, I think, is they think they only can have a conversation with somebody if there's going to be a transaction on the other side of it, or if there's going to be something that they're going to gain from the experience, versus recognizing that relationships are these really rich things that if you continue to invest in them, they'll pay off in ways that you won't expect at all. I had a moment where I met somebody at a conference probably a little over a year ago now. And, as soon as he heard what my name was, he was like, oh, I've been meaning to meet you for years. And I was like, what? And I was very confused because he was from New Zealand. And I was like, how do you even know who I am? But I used to work for an Australian software company. And even though that part of my career had ended almost 10 years ago, I had done such a good job of continuing to maintain relationships with people in that side of the market that he had heard about my work from somebody at a conference in New Zealand. And so I just think that that's a testament to the fact that we never know where these things are going to crop up for us, but it also takes that mindset of being I'm going to just continue to plant seeds and invest and enrich other people's lives and relationships, and know that that's going to come back to me in the ways that it's supposed to.
And so I feel that's where the strategy part is almost not real. Not real, but not using that word in some way of I don't know, when I started my business almost 4 years ago, the people who supported me in the beginning were people who I've had relationships with for a really long time, but not to help me build this company that I never knew was going to exist, but people who I kept in touch with because genuinely I had a relationship with them. And so then when it was time to say, hey, I'm doing this thing, there were people that were there that supported me, but I can't say that 20 years ago, I was like, oh, I'm going to keep talking to this person because that one day that's going to come back and help me. And it has been really interesting to see where those things come back. And I think that it's to just be really genuine in being a connector and connecting with people, being really genuine in that is what comes back. Because what you just said too is like the thing that I'm planting seeds all the time. You don't know when they're going to grow. And, 2 years later, we're sitting here having this conversation now, right? Or 2 years from now, who knows what happens there, but it's because we invested in a relationship and supporting one another in a different way. And so I just think that that's the part, is that getting that transactional part out of it and really understanding that too. It's like, I don't know what comes from meeting that one person, but the connections that they have, the things that they have, or maybe it's also like, we just grabbed a cup of coffee and I really enjoyed that hour I spent with that person, and that can be enough. Not they're signing a big contract for me.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to that piece that Kristy was saying too, which is like, you just really have to focus on when you're building connections, recognizing that like you're showing up for the other person just as much as you're showing up for yourself. And again, it's like my mind goes to the fact of like, we all know these kind of people who in business, they only show up to take, they only show up to pitch, they only show up when they have something to sell or a program to promote. And we've got those people in our inbox, and it's hard because it's like, I'm not, maybe this is a boundary I need to build. I'm not the one to like turn around to that person and be like, yo, like, look, I've done enough, but I don't really feel like this is a reciprocal situation. But we all know those kinds of people, right? Versus like, I guess it's some golden rule stuff of like, we want to show up for the people who show up for us. And so if we want people to be that way about our work or the things that we're creating or the projects that we're working on, we have to be genuine in those ways that we show up for other people, and see that as an investment in your future self. There's a concept of relationship development that I like some pieces of, and I can leave others, but it's this notion of transactional competency. And the notion of transactional competency that I like is, it's like imagining your relationships like, they're kind of this piggy bank, if you will. And the mistake that a lot of people make when it comes to relationship development is that they're trying to cash in before they've deposited anything into said piggy bank. They're just meeting somebody for the first time and trying to be like, okay, and here's what I sell, and here's what I do, or here's, make 3 connections for me. And again, I see this a lot sometimes in like networking environments, versus being like, the foundation to a great relationship and a connection is knowing this person, is understanding what they're passionate about, not just professionally, but personally, is understanding the projects that they're working on, and so these are all things that in an early conversation with somebody you can ask. You can say, what is the work that you're most excited about? Like, what's a project or a goal that you're working towards in the coming year? Who are the kind of people that you're interested in meeting? And learning those things about somebody and making those deposits, if you will, into the bank. And again, not doing this in a way because you're like, oh, I'm going to cash in someday, but recognizing that there may come a point where you want them to celebrate or promote something that you're doing. And so if you start by making those investments or planting those seeds, I think people are a lot more likely to show up when you say, hey, I've got something going on. Would you mind sharing about it? And again, it doesn't have to be something that we have to be highly methodical about. I totally agree with you, Danielle, of like, I don't sit here and like plot and plan, but I do take the time to recognize when I'm making meaningful connections. Like, I think that's one of the things that, I want to be stronger at in this coming year is like, for example, when I'm in spaces or ethos where there's a good group of people who have work that I think is really aligned, I do try and do something that most people don't do, which is like to always offer the opportunity to connect over coffee with somebody, even if it's virtually. And so, for example, for me, like in this season, this past year, I one of the many things I do is I mentor young women entrepreneurs through University of Washington's Women's Leadership Program. And I was like, it was amazing to be a part of that, but I really want to know those other women mentors, because those are my people. Like, don't get me wrong, love the mentees, will continue doing that work forever. But I really want to know those other women, not because I'm sitting over here being like, they need to buy what I'm selling, but I know that they're in orbits and circles and community groups that I want to be associated with. And so, that was like my big strategy this season, was like, I made sure to go back through the list of all of them and just reach out and say, hey, I am trying to do a better job of following up with the people I meet in communities that I'm proud to be a part of. Would you be open to it? And, not everybody says yes, not everybody has the time, but I love those sort of opportunities to see where those connections can lead.
So one of the things that I've been noticing is that the support can be very direct. Like there's oftentimes when we will finish doing an interview with a podcast guest and they will explicitly say, what are you working on and what can I do to support you? Which is like really, really nice. And so I've tried to do that with people that I'm connecting with as well. But I actually think the most amazing things have happened when I've maybe thought a little bit deeper about what the person is doing and be more creative in like my ideation around what would be something that could be helpful to them that isn't even on their radar at all. And so I sometimes magic happens and I'm able to like figure that out and do it. And and then that's really cool because then it's like a surprise to them, like, oh, this is helpful. And it just feels sort of different and special. Do you have thoughts about like ways to do that, ways to be creative about how to help people?
Yeah, one that I always love to do, is to send, articles or podcasts or things that are inspiring me that make me think of folks. Especially if it's somebody who I really like know their work and I see it as something adjacent. And so that's one thing that I love to do is like if I haven't connected with somebody in a while and I want to, spark a conversation or set up, a chance to reconnect or just hear about what they're working on, I'll try and do a little digging and see if I can find something that might be just an item of inspiration for them. Because I think, oftentimes there's like, this terrible thing that people do where it's like that email that's like, just reaching out. And I'm like, don't ever just reach out to reach out. Reach out with something to offer. What is there something that of value that I can add? Another one, and I think we've talked about this a lot, but is just always looking for chances to make connections or like, I call it like web weaving of like, I think it's really cool when you can take people across your network and figure out ways to bring them together. And so those usually aren't something that I'm super strategic about. They typically strike me in a moment of inspiration, but I was just sending one this morning because it was like, oh yeah, I had caught up with, a friend of mine, Cheryl, on Tuesday, and she was talking to me about some things, to do with her team building and growing her organization. And then on Thursday, I was catching up with somebody else and we were having a very similar conversation. And so I took a moment, to connect the two of them. And usually when I make those kind of moments of connections, I try to be really specific too, because I think it's always a little awkward when somebody sends you an introduction as like, you're a human and you're a human. Good luck. And you're like, okay, like, nice to meet you. And I trust too. I trust that people make connections in good faith, and again, it doesn't always have to lead to something immediate. But when I do make connections, I always try to add context, and then occasionally too, if there's somebody in my network, and I think this piece is really important and appropriate, is that when I'm making connections, sometimes I think it's really important to ask for consent too, because there's people in my network who are really busy, myself included, and I've just always appreciated this. When somebody reaches out and says like, hey, I'm thinking about connecting you with so-and-so, but I know that they're looking for like mentorship and a conversation. Is that something that you have capacity for in this season? And I think this is something that like we need to get better at as a community, especially as women, because I think that we oftentimes give a lot of our time and our energy away for free, and it kind of creates these spaces where people are like, oh, I'm just gonna pick your brain, and you're like, well, that's actually what I do for a living. And so sometimes I think it's really important, when you're thinking about connecting somebody, especially if that connection is pretty adjacent to their work, but doesn't lead to something that might be a more immediate, like, oh, I'm introducing you as a referral. I like to always just boundary check with people beforehand. And I think that's a really important thing as well. People really will respect you and appreciate the fact that you're considerate of their time. And so that's another thing that really comes to mind.
I think that's super helpful too, is to make sure that the person you're introducing someone to is on board. Because if they're not, there's nothing worse than making a connection and being like, hey, you guys should meet. And then the other person just does not respond, right? Like is not interested. They're not responding. Like that doesn't feel great. And also doesn't look great, I guess, for you, for your connection abilities, right? I will say one of the things that I try to do or keep in mind is like when that spark happens, and the way that you just talked about, like, oh, this week I was talking to two separate people about a very similar topic. And I do find that happens a lot, right? Like there's something happening in the zeitgeist and all of a sudden it's coming up a lot. And that I just love because I just like the synergy of all of that. But it is paying attention to that Like, there's a reason why two different people brought up the same thing to you. And what is your role in that?
Do you think too some of it is like subconsciously we're like, sort of mulling over in the back of our mind something that someone's saying, so we may ask a question in a certain way that brings it out from someone else? Like we create the web as much, it's that. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And I think too, depending on the circles that we run in, we, I'm like, it might be the algorithms we're in, but we like tend to, be in these kind of moments where we're dancing around people who are coming across similar content or similar conversations. And then we're all kind of thinking about it in the back of our minds. Like for me, one that's been an interesting conversation, and it was the one I was kind of alluding to, is like, I've been talking with a lot of women leaders right now about the challenge of leading teams in this current cultural moment and cultural climate. And, I think it's also this opportunity to be a little bit vulnerable with people about like, yeah, I don't have this shit figured out sometimes. And that I think is also really, really critical to finding who we can be genuine with, is like talking about the things that are maybe a little bit more challenging for us in our current moment, and, giving an opportunity to kind of open up. Because what I found in doing that with this one person was like, oh, I'm not the only person struggling with this. And actually, like, even if it didn't lead to solutions, it was really transformative to just sit with another leader and hear her say like, yeah, I'm having challenges with this too. And then when I talked to the third person, she's like, oh, that's exactly like what I was dealing with last year. I was like, you need to talk about this, because the catharsis is going to come just from the fact that you're not the only one in it alone. And I think that's the other reason why building connections and building relationships like this is so important in entrepreneurship in particular. I mean, there's lots of reasons to do it from a business perspective, but in the world of entrepreneurship, I think we often get isolated in our own heads. And so one of the things that I try to do whenever I feel like I'm in a little bit of a funk is like, okay, how can I be reaching out and creating more connections? Because it starts to stir my subconscious in a different way and think more creatively than I do when I'm like in my own little bubble. And I just think that that piece is really important to the equation as well.
So Madeline, when you think of your strongest partnerships, I want you to tell us like what are the characteristics of that? What are the behaviors, the values? Like, what do they look like? What makes them successful?
Okay, I've got a couple that I'm thinking of right now. And one of the things that I think makes them most successful is the fact that we see each other as thought partners. And so I'm thinking of a friend and a company in particular that when I did that big tour I was talking about, they were the main stage sponsor, which was like a huge risk and a very big investment into this idea I had. And I was like, why did they do it? Well, one, the founder and I have had a 10-year relationship. And so we've been peers in a professional sense for a really long time. But the power of that peer proximity is that thought partnership of like, we just started a conversation about something and we have that sort of relationship where we'll go and talk and meet with each other and connect and, play out ideas and scenarios regardless of if there's like a goal or an outcome or a project. And I think that that's really, really important. And I think that's where people get it wrong sometimes, is like partnerships really start from just being able to be in proximity to each other and ideate. And so if you're too eager to, again, rush towards some sort of transactional relationship or transactional thing happening, you might miss some sort of magic that could have happened if you were just willing to stay and be like, I don't have a goal or an outcome yet, or like the goal of this conversation is to just have some discussion and to learn from each other and get each other's input. And so that's one of the hallmarks, I think, of some of my best partnerships, is that they're all with people who know that if they were to send me a note or to, text me or something and say like, hey, I've got this thing that I'm like working on or wrestling with, that I'm the kind of person who's open enough that if I have capacity, I'll say like, yeah, let's hop on a call. Let's think it through. Let's talk it through. Because I think that makes for like a depth of connection that's really important. Another thing is that the best partnerships are always with people who are super respectful of my expertise and know the line of when, okay, this is like, something I should probably be paying you for. And so, that I think is really critical, because I think sometimes, again, there's these moments where we want to be really supportive of other people, but then we have to be like, okay, and this is where it's going to get into something where it's my work. And, it's hard to form partnerships well with people when they're always taking advantage. And so I think that that's a really important thing to draw the line with your relationships around, is just really respecting and having clarity as to like, what is somebody's work. And then also having the respect for people's, limitations. I think the thing is that, what makes for great partnerships is the ability to say yes sometimes, and the ability to say no sometimes, and knowing that that's not going to cause like harm or bifurcation to the relationship. Like if I had come back to some of those partners and said to them, hey, this is the thing I'm doing, and some of them said no, I'm not suddenly going to like cast them aside or stop investing in the relationship or anything like that. I'm going to just understand it's a business decision and keep building and developing the relationship in that regard. And so I think that piece is really critical too. And then the last thing is that champion piece, Kristy. It's like that notion of recognizing that if I want people, to be celebrating or promoting or talking about the work that I'm doing, I have to be equally championing the work that other people do. And so that requires some paying attention as well. And so I do think it's a little bit of a challenge in the world we live in, because there's so much content coming out. There's so many things going on. People are constantly sharing on LinkedIn. But whenever I get an opportunity, whenever I come across something that people are doing that is really exciting or new, I do my best wherever I can to celebrate it, to feature it in my newsletter, to even just give them like a comment on social media, so that they see that I'm equally showing up in that way for the relationship.
There was a lot in that answer. Danielle, I want to ask you that question, because I know you have some strong partnerships. I'm curious what you feel like is the characteristic that makes it spark.
I think there has to be like just a genuine connection too. Because I feel like there's a lot of people who it can, the people that have supported me most in my life, like we have a relationship that is outside of this as well. And not, probably not everyone, but I just feel like I'm also early still in my entrepreneurship journey, that those are the people that showed up first, that were like, okay, we're in for this. What can we do? But they were people that I worked for 20 years ago, not knowing that when I stopped working there and I continued the relationship in a way that would pay off. And so I think it's genuine. Like when I call you, I'm not calling to say like, hey, are you going to hire me? It's like, I actually do really want to know how you're doing. And I really want to know, like, and if we could do business together, that would be amazing. But that's not the requirement of this call. And I think that's where sometimes it is even hard for me to navigate, because it's like, well, what am I doing? Right? Am I doing this right? Or am I asking for too much? Or am I not asking at all? And so it is a weird line to draw, but I feel like when I can explain what I do and how it can be helpful, and you're somebody that trusts me just as a human, you get more of an introduction, you get more of an open door.
Yeah.
Yeah, that piece is so critical. I think the relationship piece is very key. And I also think perhaps Danielle, what that sparks for me is shared values too. I think it's really hard to build great partnerships with people who don't have some degree of shared values. It might not have to be everything, but I think especially if our work is tied to something that has a bigger sense of purpose around it, we've got to have shared values with the people we're partnering with.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to leave our listeners with, Madeline?
I'd like to leave your listeners with just a reminder to cultivate connection in person whenever possible. That's been something for me that I have really been focused on in the last couple of months. And, it's not always possible when people live far away. But one of the things that I always try to do is when I am traveling is to show up and meet people in person where they are. And I think in the world we live in right now, things are very intense and very fast paced. And one of the ways that we can create more meaning and value in our lives and in our work is just by sitting down with people and sitting across the table with them, having a meal, having a cup of coffee. And so, in a time and a season where things can get very hectic, I want to just encourage folks to take the time to make relationships in that in-person way, because I think it really matters and it can lead to really wonderful things for your life and your work.
I love that as well. And I want to thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your wisdom with us. It has been a pleasure, Madeline.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you want to have more of your own opposite of small talk conversations, we can help.
We've created a starter pack of big talk questions that you can download and use to ditch the boring small talk and create more meaningful conversations with the people around you. Get it in the link below. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think of this topic and what you'd like to hear about next. Thanks for watching.
Stay curious and talk big.